Okay, so we have an evening live stream. See how this goes as usual. Uh, Live streams very much depend on participation of subscribers, so please ask questions, leave comments, and we'll see if we could get something flowing. Whilst I'm waiting for the first comment or two, I'm just going to multitask. We'll see how this goes. I've done evening live streams before and they've been quite successful, so we'll see how this goes. Like I say, it's just an opportunity for me to interact with subscribers. So we'll see how it goes. I can never tell if that one is me or a subscriber, the one person. I guess it depends if people are online. Well, we've definitely got two now, so there's definitely at least one other person watching. Um, so, hi Carl, good evening. How are you? I like the little clapping hands emoji. Just okay. Yeah, I know the feeling. I've had. I was quite restless last night. I wasn't feeling great myself. But today's been a busy day, not just because of the news, but I think I've got a new student, so it's been a busy day. And I had to deliver something via eBay to the post office before before they close at 5:30. So, do you want to mention anything that's happened today, Carl? You mentioned just okay. So, has something happened, or if you're comfortable sharing it, I'm all ears. Definitely an interesting time in British politics. Yeah, it's been quite something. I still can't believe Truss's premiership is so short. Um, Not even a full month in terms of a calendar month. Not the whole of September, not the whole of October. So there isn't even a single whole month that she was in office. Um, I was trying to explain to my student today about British politics, and it was not an easy task. I think Sunak will last a bit longer. If we have a general election in 2024, he'll be in office at least until then. So at least 2 years, but possibly longer. Welsh Punk, welcome to the live stream. Do you think there will be another election? Well, obviously the opposition parties are clambering for this, but the Tories aren't going to call it. Um, I mean, it would make no sense for Sunak. I'm talking from their perspective to call an election, especially since Labour is leading the polls right now. The Tories would probably lose, so they're not going to do it. So I think we have to be realistic. It's going to be 2024. I've very mixed feelings on this. I mean, I think there's definitely a mandate for an election. The other side of the coin, though, is we're not a presidential system, so we don't directly choose prime ministers. But when the Tories say, when they make that point, they say that they had the manifesto from 2019, but they've now changed leader three times. Well, Johnson, Truss, and Sunak. So I don't know, mixed feelings about it. Part of me thinks, an election would be just more disruption. I mean, I don't mean it's not democracy, but it's yet another big event. In a year of big political events, we've had the death of the Queen and the Ascension. We've had three prime ministers, four chancellors. Part of me honestly thinks the dust just needs to settle a little bit. I think maybe next year is a more realistic time for an election, early next year. I was thinking, my lifetime. Hopefully, we won't be dealing with that troll. Yeah, let's hope so. He did use several other pseudonyms. I've decided, guys, if he turns up tonight, I'll just ignore him. Unless he says something that's totally beyond the pale, I'm just going to ignore him. I think I can work out his pseudonyms, so I'll see if that strategy works. But he hasn't given up. He's been trolling other videos that I've uploaded, distorting my positions. Anyway, sorry, to get back to the general election issue. I was thinking in my lifetime, I'm 37. There's been 9 prime ministers now in my lifetime. Well, going from Sunak's start of his premiership tomorrow. And I think 5 of them came to office by being appointed by their own party. So Margaret Thatcher came to office by winning the general election in 1979, Tony Blair by winning the general election in 1997, and David Cameron by winning the general election in 2010. The others, John Major, Gordon Brown, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and Rishi Sunak, all came to power by winning elections within their own party. Now, John Major, Theresa May, and Boris Johnson all won elections, so they had a mandate. But that's interesting. Only 3 prime ministers actually came to power via election first time round in my lifetime. So it's just worth considering. Like I say, Major, May, and Johnson all won elections after they were appointed prime minister. Gordon Brown, of course, waited 2.5 years and then lost that election. I think that was a big mistake, especially since Blair had such a long premiership. It looked a bit, well, arrogant at the time. I remember thinking it was a mistake. Gordon Brown's actually the only prime minister I've met. Well, he was chancellor at the time. Um, he opened a centre in Gateshead, but this was when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. I think my dad met John Major at one point. So, yeah, I don't think we're going to see an election anytime soon. Of course, the opposition parties will call for that. That's what you would expect them to do. In a sense, though, for Starmer, he may actually be secretly hoping that there isn't an election very soon, because although Labour's doing well in the polls, the Tories, well, I think he was probably hoping Truss would stay on, because as long as she was in power, it was good for Labour. Sunak, I think, will not have the problems that she had. I think he will not make the mistakes. For example, one of her mistakes was having a cabinet of pure loyalists, not having anyone in that cabinet who was critical of her. And I was reading something earlier, the firing of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary. Now, whatever people think of her, her offence was relatively minor, breaking the ministerial code. It wasn't, in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't a major offence. So I think it may have been a mistake for Truss to force her to resign, and also not getting any different voices around her cabinet table. So Sunak would, from a Tory point of view, Sunak would make a good move by bringing Penny Mordaunt in, I think. At least we have multiple parties in the British Parliament, unlike the US House of Representatives, where there are only 2 options. I don't even think there are any independent politicians in the House. Yeah, not to my knowledge. I was explaining to my student today our system of political parties. I actually showed her some flyers, and she was a bit confused. I showed her a Green Party flyer, and I said they're called the Green Party. And then I said, and the Labour Party is red and the Tories are blue, and she was confused. So I had to explain Green Party. It happens to be their colour, but it's also the name of the party. So, and my student's from China. So you can imagine trying to explain a democratic system to someone who comes from a single party state. I think she was very confused, but it was a topic of conversation. It helps her improve her vocabulary. So I just corrected a mistake in the House. Yeah. By law, they don't have to call an election until January 2025, which would mean 2030 afterwards. This would be the only election this decade. 4 elections in the tens, but just one in the 20s. That's nuts. It's also plausible. The thing is, I do think there were too many elections in the 2010s. It was just in a healthy democracy, you need to have a situation where the people decide. But I also think governments need time to basically make policies and for anything to happen. So if we were having regular elections in the sense of, for example, we had 2010, 2015. Okay, that's a normal period. But then 2017, then 2019. I just think it was a bit too much. And then into the 2010s, of course, we had three divisive referendums. People remember too the Scotland referendum and the EU referendum, but there was another one, the AV referendum in 2011, I believe. Not as high profile as the others, but um, in a sense, I think we need a degree of stability. An enormous amount has happened this year. We have a new monarch, and the king is finding his way. There's a lot of things going on. So, in a sense, although I understand the calls for another general election, I sort of think we need the dust to settle. Because remember, next year we're going to have the coronation as well. So, I don't know. I mean, we could have a situation where Sunak's appointed by the king tomorrow. Then there's a general election. Starmer wins and he becomes the prime minister. I think if that was this year, my goodness, we would have four prime ministers in a single year, which would be unprecedented, actually. I'm trying to think the last time we had three prime ministers in a single year. If my history serves me right, it would have been 1827. Let me get this right. Lord Liverpool, then George Canning was appointed prime minister and died, and then Viscount Godric became prime minister, and he resigned not long afterwards. Hi Nathan, I think today is historic, as you said earlier, regardless of what spectrum one stands in politics. I do think Sunak will struggle with red seat walls, so we'll see how that goes. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you guys heard the interview on LBC yesterday. I made a video about it with Sangeeta Maiska. And the guy called up from, it's now somewhat notorious, I think his name was Jerry from Lowestoft. His whole pitch was Sunak's not British because he's not white, which I personally have a problem with that sort of mindset. But regardless, I think that mindset is quite strong on some red wall seats, but it isn't just the race thing. I think that I think there's a cult of personality around Boris Johnson, and it clearly hasn't gone away. They were doing interviews from Haywood, which is in Lancashire, I believe, earlier, and the attitude of people was just, oh, Sunak's the one that stabbed Boris in the back. Well, the way I look at it is, yes, he resigned from Johnson's government, but stabbing him in the back, this blind devotion to one man. What if Rishi Sunak genuinely believed he could no longer work under Boris Johnson? Now, surely that's a point of conviction. Okay, maybe there's opportunism there as well because he ran for leader, but this blind loyalty, I have a problem with that, especially when it's sort of a case of expecting parliamentarians to defend corruption. Not that Rishi Sunak's squeaky clean; he also had a fine for Partygate, but he doesn't quite have the skeletons that Boris Johnson has. I think we should have kept fixed term parliaments, but should have been for 4 years, like in the US. 5 is too long. I agree. I think 4 years is probably a good period. Um, yeah, I'd be tempted to agree with that. The only circumstance probably where we may have a situation, because we've had now this situation of one prime minister after another, we're starting to look like Italy. And I know the Italians actually complained about, they made a formal complaint to The Economist because they had a cover this week called Britally, showing Liz Truss with a spaghetti. It was sort of seen as a bit of a lazy stereotype, but the message was that we're starting to resemble Italian politics, where they seemingly change government every year. I don't think it's quite like that. I think it's a different situation, but I see the analogy because we are changing prime minister a lot now. The thing with fixed term parliaments, I agree. By the way, I think there's a strong case for stability with that. But the problem is, there is this kind of murmuring where people want an almost presidential system, although we're in a parliamentary democracy. I mean, when we go to the ballot box, we're not voting for Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer. We're voting for the party. But there is the sense, particularly in recent years, where the leader of a party is very much the face of that party, and people often will vote depending on who the leader is. So I think over time it's become more presidential in a sense, although it is still a constitutional system. And we have an American subscriber, Ray. Welcome. Um, let's see. Hi, Nathan. Do you think Rishi Sunak will do well as prime minister? Time will tell. I mean, technically, as I speak, Liz Truss is still prime minister for the next 12 hours. It's going to be a morning appointment, so the next, what is it now? Yeah, literally about 12 hours. Um, Here's the thing. If, let's say, there was a major terrorist attack tonight, technically Liz Truss would be the one that has to deal with it. She is still technically prime minister until the moment that the king appoints Rishi Sunak. So actually, some of the press coverage this week has been slightly inaccurate. The I, for example, said um, gone after 44 days. Well, technically it's 48 days. I know that's a formality because she announced the resignation, but it's 48 days or 49 days, depending how you look at that. But how well will he do as prime minister? I don't know. Many think he was quite a good chancellor because he gave support to businesses during the pandemic. I think he's very smart. He's only 42, so he's the youngest prime minister in 200 years since Lord Liverpool. Um, I think he'll probably last a lot longer than Truss, but that's, so will everyone. She looked very happy for a woman who now has this kind of ignominious title of shortest prime minister ever. She looked very happy when she resigned, a lot happier than other resigning prime ministers. But honestly, I just think time will tell. He has a lot on his plate. He needs to unify his very divided party. He needs to deal with the rising cost of living. He needs to reassure the markets in the wake of this disastrous mini budget that we had. And foreign policy, we have a belligerent Russia and China. Those are all issues he has to deal with. There was questions today about how he will approach India. Sunak, of course, is of Indian descent, but I think it would be a mistake for people to think um, it's going to be a case of like he will serve India. He's the British Prime Minister, and the UK will come first. So I don't think India is going to get any special favors. We do have some differences with India, particularly over Ukraine. We support Ukraine if India is officially neutral. So there's areas like that where there are some tensions. Let's see. Absolutely a culture. I had a Tory friend who left the party today. My goodness. Did they leave because they're a Johnson loyalist and they